Hello, my dear masterminds. Someone was assigned to study you, not because you were loud, not because you demanded attention, but because something about you didn't add up to them. You moved too calmly through situations that were meant to pressure you. You responded too precisely where confusion was expected. You carried yourself with a restraint that didn't match the circumstances they put you in. And that's what triggered the assignment. They weren't sent to admire you. They were sent to decode you, to figure out what you were hiding, to identify the pattern behind your decisions, to understand why outcomes kept bending in your favor, even when you weren't the most visible person in the room. They expected chaos. They expected arrogance. They expected emotion they could track and exploit. What they found instead was discipline, silence, structure, a mind that didn't rush, a presence that didn't leak information. Every time they thought they had a read on you, you shifted without reacting. Every time they prepared a test, you walked around it without acknowledging it existed. And that's when things started to get uncomfortable for them, because studying you didn't feel like observation anymore. It felt like exposure. The longer they watched, the more they realized they weren't analyzing a subject. They were standing in front of something they weren't equipped to interpret. You didn't fit their models. You didn't respond to pressure the way their training predicted. You didn't chase validation. You didn't flinch when leverage was applied. You didn't reveal insecurity when silence was used as bait. And slowly, without saying anything, you reversed the dynamic. They were supposed to be collecting data on you. Instead, they found themselves questioning their own assumptions. Their notes stopped making sense. Their conclusions contradicted each other. The more they tried to define you, the less certain they became of their own expertise. That's when the shift happened. The assignment stopped being about results and started being about self-preservation. Because there's a moment when observation turns into realization. A moment when the observer understands that what they're facing doesn't break under analysis. It adapts. It evolves. It stays 3 steps ahead without announcing the move. You weren't resisting the study. You were rendering it irrelevant. And when someone trained to analyze patterns realizes there is no stable pattern to extract, fear doesn't look like panic. It looks like withdrawal. It looks like silence. It looks like a quiet request to be moved somewhere safer, somewhere less demanding. Somewhere their understanding won't be challenged every time you breathe. You didn't threaten them. You didn't confront them. You didn't even acknowledge what was happening. You simply stayed yourself, and that was enough to make them step back. Because some minds aren't powerful because they push. They're powerful because they can't be contained. And you were never meant to be understood. You were meant to operate. Once they asked to be moved, the room didn't go back to normal. It couldn't, because the moment someone trained to observe chooses distance, it sends a signal no one wants to say out loud. It means the situation exceeded their frame of reference. It means the subject refused to behave according to expectation. And that's exactly what happened with you. You never gave them the reaction they were looking for. You never provided the emotional spikes they could chart. You never followed the sequence they were prepared to map. You stayed consistent when inconsistency was expected. You stayed composed when disruption was the goal. You stayed quiet when noise was supposed to force a reveal. And that consistency did more than confuse them. It dismantled the entire purpose of the assignment. Because people trained to analyze depend on variance. They depend on predictable pressure points. They depend on patterns repeating under stress. You offered none of that. You moved through situations with an internal rhythm that didn't sync with their environment. You made decisions without hesitation, but also without urgency. You didn't rush to fill silence. You didn't rush to justify your choices. You didn't rush to explain your thinking. And that absence of explanation became the loudest thing in the room. They started noticing how others adjusted around you, how conversations shifted when you entered, how outcomes stabilized after you spoke, how momentum changed without you taking credit. They started realizing that whatever you carried wasn't performance. It wasn't strategy alone. It was alignment. The kind that doesn't need constant adjustment because it's already calibrated. That's when observation turned inward. They began questioning their tools, their training, their confidence. Because nothing unsettles an analyst more than a subject who doesn't behave like a subject. You weren't reactive. You weren't defensive. You weren't evasive. You were simply unavailable to manipulation. And when someone trained to study influence realizes influence isn't working, the safest move is retreat. That's why the request wasn't dramatic. It wasn't confrontational. It was quiet, professional, controlled. A subtle acknowledgement that staying would cost more than leaving. Because the longer they stayed, the clearer it became that you weren't being observed. You were being mirrored. Your restraint highlighted their impatience. Your clarity exposed their uncertainty. Your silence forced them to hear their own noise. And that kind of reflection is uncomfortable for anyone who thought they were the one holding authority. You didn't need to win. You didn't need to prove anything. You didn't even need to be aware of the assignment to neutralize it. You just continued operating from a level they couldn't access. And when that happens, withdrawal isn't failure. It's self-protection. Because some people aren't powerful because of what they do. They're powerful because of what they don't give away. And you gave nothing they could use. That's why they stepped back. That's why they chose distance. And that's why the system quietly adjusted around you instead of pushing harder. After the reassignment, something subtle but permanent changed. The pressure didn't increase. The scrutiny didn't escalate. Instead, it dissolved. Not because you disappeared, but because you proved impossible to contain within their frameworks. You became the variable they couldn't isolate, the factor they couldn't neutralize. And when systems encounter something they can't categorize, they don't attack it directly. They quietly route around it. You may have noticed it without realizing what it was. Decisions suddenly bypassing you. Conversations becoming careful. Certain people choosing distance instead of confrontation. That wasn't coincidence. That was recalibration. They were adjusting the environment because adjusting you wasn't an option. You didn't resist. You didn't rebel. You didn't break formation. You simply continued operating with the same calm precision that made the assignment collapse in the first place. And that consistency forced a realization. Whatever drives you doesn't respond to pressure. It doesn't respond to incentives. It doesn't respond to pressure tactics or praise. It responds only to internal alignment. And that unsettles systems built on leverage. Because leverage only works when someone needs something external. You didn't. You weren't chasing approval. You weren't seeking validation. You weren't trying to be seen as impressive. You were focused on execution, on timing, on clarity. And that focus made you unreadable in the ways that matter most. They couldn't provoke you into mistakes. They couldn't provoke you into revealing your thinking. They couldn't pressure you into defending your position. Every tactic they were trained to deploy required reaction. You offered none. And in that absence, their authority dissolved quietly. The real challenge wasn't that you were smarter. It wasn't that you were stronger. It was that you were self-contained. You didn't leak information through emotion. You didn't give signals through anxiety. You didn't betray yourself through urgency. And when someone like that exists inside a system, the safest response isn't confrontation. It's containment through distance. So they moved the observer, not because you demanded it, not because you noticed, but because leaving you alone preserved stability, better than trying to interfere. And that's the irony they won't admit. By trying to study you, they confirmed your position. By failing to understand you, they validated your independence. By stepping away, they acknowledged a truth they couldn't put in writing. Some individuals don't function as components within a structure. They function as constants. They don't need to be monitored. They don't need to be corrected. They don't need to be guided. They move on their own axis. And once that becomes clear, the smartest move is to give them space and let the environment adjust around them. You didn't disrupt the system. You revealed its limits. And once limits are revealed, nothing ever feels the same again. What they never expected was how quietly the hierarchy would shift after that. No announcements, no confrontations, no dramatic fallout. Just a subtle realignment that only people paying attention could feel. You were no longer placed under scrutiny. You were positioned beyond it. The rules that applied to others seemed to soften around you. The urgency that pressured everyone else didn't touch you the same way. It wasn't favoritism. It was recognition. The system sensed something it couldn't measure, and instead of pushing against it, it stepped aside. That's what happens when control encounters self-mastery. You didn't earn this position through force. You earned it through consistency, through restraint, through the discipline of not reacting when reaction was expected, through the clarity of knowing when to move and when to remain still. People noticed how outcomes stabilized when you were involved, how chaos lost momentum around you, how decisions landed cleaner. That wasn't charisma. That wasn't luck. That was presence anchored in self-command. And self-command is rare. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture. It simply operates. That's why the observer couldn't stay. Watching you forced them to confront the limits of their influence. They were trained to identify leverage, but you didn't have the kind they could pull. You weren't motivated by fear of loss. You weren't driven by hunger for approval. You weren't distracted by ego contests. You moved with internal permission, and internal permission can't be revoked. Once that realization settled in, the tone around you changed. People stopped probing, stopped testing, stopped pushing. Not because they were afraid of you, but because they respected the cost of interference. They could feel that engaging you required alignment, not authority. That challenging you demanded substance, not status. And most people aren't prepared for that exchange. You weren't rising within their structure. You were standing parallel to it. And that parallel position changes everything. It means you're not dependent on their systems to function. It means your decisions don't require their approval to hold weight. It means your presence isn't something they can manage through proximity. They tried observation. It failed. They tried distance. It worked better. And in that space, You continued moving forward, exactly as you always had. Calm, precise, unbothered. You didn't chase recognition because recognition was already adjusting to you. You didn't demand authority because authority had quietly acknowledged you. That's the kind of power that doesn't need to be claimed. It's already assigned. And the people who know the difference between influence and control felt it immediately. You weren't a variable to be managed. You were a force to be respected. And once that truth settled in, the system did what systems always do when faced with something beyond scope. It adapted by getting out of the way. And that's the unspoken power that most people never understand, the art of being unstudied. The higher you rise, the more they'll try to measure you, dissect you, label you. But measurement only works on patterns. You stopped giving them any. You stopped living on repeat. Every move you make now isn't about reaction. It's about recalibration. You've learned that control isn't about volume. It's about precision. The kind of precision that comes from silence, discipline, and restraint. You know what's funny? They still whisper your name in rooms they thought you'd never enter. Not out of obsession, but confusion. Because your path doesn't make sense on paper. Your progress doesn't match the data. Every chart that should have predicted your limits stopped functioning the moment you stopped caring about limits. You've become something beyond statistics, a living exception. And exceptions, by nature, unsettle institutions built on predictability. They can't write you into their reports without rewriting the rules. They can't define you without admitting their definitions are outdated. That's why the observers vanish quietly. That's why the analysts avoid your orbit. You represent everything they can't standardize: intuition over instruction, purpose over permission, stillness over struggle. You mastered the discipline of energy. You know when to speak and when to let silence cut through their noise. You know when to step forward and when to let curiosity do the work for you. You don't chase validation. You let your results echo for you. And that echo carries weight because it's real. Not manufactured, not desperate. Real. You've earned a strange kind of respect. The kind that doesn't need applause. People sense it before they speak to you. They adjust their tone without realizing why. They slow their pace when they approach. That's presence. That's what happens when your frequency stops matching ordinary noise. You move differently. You think differently. You carry time differently. That's why their analysis failed, because they were trying to measure something timeless. You weren't built to fit inside their timelines, expectations, or projections. You were built to rewrite them. So when they asked to be moved, they weren't just escaping discomfort. They were acknowledging reality, that you are not a case study. You are the control variable in a world full of experiments, the constant that makes everything else reveal its truth. You didn't just outgrow their understanding. You forced evolution in real time. And that's the kind of move no dataset can predict, no formula can explain, and no system can prepare for. Here's the truth: they never write down. When someone like you enters the equation, the system doesn't fight you, it freezes. Because systems are built to handle resistance, not transcendence. You didn't rebel, you didn't attack, you didn't demand entry. You simply elevated beyond the frame they were using. And when elevation happens without noise, it unsettles everything that depends on noise to feel important. You became proof that mastery doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself over time, quietly, inevitably. That's why the room changed when you stopped explaining. That's why opportunities rearranged themselves without invitations. That's why people who once spoke over you now hesitate before speaking at all. You didn't win a confrontation, you won alignment. And alignment beats force every single time. They don't know how you did it, because you didn't follow a script. You followed awareness. You trusted timing more than urgency. You trusted preparation more than performance. You trusted restraint more than reaction. And that combination is rare, because it requires confidence that doesn't need witnesses. The kind of confidence that can wait. The kind that doesn't flinch when ignored. The kind that grows stronger when underestimated. That's the energy they couldn't chart. That's the reason their notes stopped mid-sentence. You operate from a place where outcomes are chosen, not chased. Where momentum is engineered, not borrowed. Where power is internal, not displayed. And once someone reaches that level, observation becomes pointless, because you're no longer a subject, you're a signal. Others respond to you without realizing why. Doors open without conversations. Resistance dissolves without conflict. The hierarchy adjusts because it has to, not because you demanded it, but because reality recognized coherence. You didn't climb the ladder. You changed the gravity of the room. And gravity doesn't argue. It just pulls everything into order. That's the final shift. Not dominance, not control. Influence without effort. Presence without performance. Authority without announcement. The reason they asked to be moved wasn't fear. It was clarity. They saw what happens next before it happened, and they knew one thing for certain. Whatever you touch from here on out will reorganize itself around your standard. Not because you're loud, not because you're visible, but because you are exact. And exactness is the one force no system can ignore. What they never admit is this. Once someone like you is identified, the game is already over. Not because you crushed anyone, not because you exposed anything, but because awareness shifted sides. You reached a point where you no longer needed permission to move, validation to act, or applause to confirm direction. And that is the moment true leverage appears. From the outside, it looks like luck. From inside the system, it feels like inevitability. You didn't speed up. You slowed down. You didn't chase clarity. You waited until clarity came to you. And in that stillness, everything became readable. Patterns, motives, timing, weak points disguised as confidence, strengths hidden behind silence. While others were reacting to noise, you were studying signal. While others were busy proving themselves, you were refining yourself. That's why, when decisions were made, your name didn't need to be mentioned. Your presence was already assumed. You became the constant variable, the one factor. Outcomes adjusted around. People sensed it before they understood it. Conversations changed tone when you entered. Plans softened. Certainty wavered. Not because you demanded control, but because your calm suggested foresight. Calm like that doesn't come from optimism. It comes from preparation. From knowing you've already accounted for the worst-case scenario and found it manageable. That's the confidence that unsettles rooms. Because it can't be rushed. It can't be pressured. It can't be manipulated. It already knows where it's going. And once that energy locks in, resistance becomes irrelevant. Not everyone will understand you. They don't need to. Not everyone will support you. They don't have to. The only thing required is that reality continues responding to alignment, and it will, every time. Because alignment removes friction. Because alignment removes doubt. Because alignment turns intention into outcome without force. You didn't disappear from their radar. You graduated beyond it. You became someone whose next move doesn't need to be tracked, because it can't be intercepted. The path ahead doesn't require explanation. It requires precision, and you already operate there. That's why the study ended. That's why the file closed. That's why the observer stepped away. You're no longer something to analyze. You're something others adapt to after it's too late to stop. And from this point forward, every quiet choice you make will echo louder than any announcement ever could. Hello, my dear masterminds. Once, it was only in your mind. They scoffed. They dismissed. They laughed at the audacity of what you dared to imagine. They called it fantasy, delusion. A story you told yourself to feel alive. But tonight, look around. The walls, the lights, the whispers, they're real. The dream that lived in silence now stands in flesh and form, undeniable, unshakable. And the best part? Every set of eyes that mocked you is locked on you now. They have no escape, no excuse, no defense. They're forced to sit in the audience of a reality you authored from nothing. They laughed when you spoke it out loud, didn't they? Called it fantasy, called it impossible, told you to wake up and accept the ordinary, but you didn't. You held the picture in your mind like fire, feeding it with patience, guarding it when no one else believed. That vision became oxygen. And now here it is, no longer a dream, no longer a sketch inside your skull. It's standing in daylight, undeniable, breathing, alive. And the same eyes that once rolled with mockery are wide with disbelief, forced to admit that what they swore was delusion was only delayed arrival. That's why the room feels different now. Every corner buzzes with the truth. You dreamt it, you carried it, and you pulled it into existence. And now they can't look away. For them, it was always just talk, just fantasy, just a story you whispered to yourself. They never believed it could grow legs, never imagined it could break through walls and step into reality. But now, here it is, standing taller than their doubts, brighter than their disbelief, undeniable in its presence. And the shock is written all over their faces. The dream they mocked has become the stage they must now live on. They are spectators, powerless, reduced to witnesses of the transformation they swore would never come. And the hardest part for them isn't watching it exist. It's realizing they have no control, no influence, no power to stop it. Your dream turned into reality, and reality turned into their punishment. What rattles them most isn't the dream itself. It's that they're forced to watch it breathe in front of them. They tried to dismiss it, tried to laugh it away. But here it stands, undeniable, no longer a sketch in your imagination, but a monument they can't tear down. Their silence is the loudest proof of all, because every second they watch is another second of surrender. And it stings them, doesn't it? To see what they swore would never happen unfold step by step, detail by detail, exactly as you envisioned. They can't rewrite the script now. They can't erase the evidence. The dream they mocked has bound them as witnesses. And the irony is perfect. They became the audience of the very story they refused to believe. Every step you take now feels like déjà vu, doesn't it? Because you already walked these halls in your mind, already lived this scene 1,000 times when no one else believed. They mocked it as fantasy, dismissed it as delusion, but you knew it was rehearsal. The dream was the draft, the blueprint, the prophecy. And tonight, the prophecy is fulfilled. What once lived in silence has unfolded into undeniable reality, and the very people who doubted you are trapped in the role of witnesses. They can't rewrite the ending now. They can't escape the stage. They sit in their own disbelief, forced to accept that your vision outran their laughter. You dreamt it, you owned it, and now they're living in the proof of what they swore could never exist. Look at their faces now, frozen between disbelief and shame. Because the cruelest twist of fate is this: they aren't just watching your dream become real. They're watching themselves become the villains of their own memory. Every smirk, every dismissal, every word they once used to tear you down now plays back in their minds like echoes in a cave they can't leave. They're trapped in the reflection of their own arrogance, forced to measure the difference between their noise and your vision. And that mirror doesn't forgive. It doesn't let them hide. It shows them exactly what they were: doubters, mockers, cowards who couldn't see past their own limits. Now the mirror shines brighter than their excuses, and reality forces them to bow, because the dream they called impossible has already crowned itself as truth, and they can't unsee it. They forget the hours, don't they? The nights when no one clapped, no one cared, no one believed. While they mocked, you were building. While they laughed, you were shaping. Every quiet hour became a brick. Every sacrifice became a beam. Every doubt they hurled became fuel for the fire. And now, the stage they're staring at wasn't handed to you. It was carved from the silence they thought would bury you. That's what makes it sting them most. They can't claim they helped, can't pretend they saw it coming, because this reality was born in defiance of their disbelief. And now here they sit, spectators in the arena they said you'd never enter. Their punishment isn't just watching, it's knowing they fueled the very dream they tried to crush, and that dream now towers over them in daylight. Look closely, their eyes give them away, wide, restless, darting like cornered prey. They don't know whether to stay silent or to applaud, whether to hide or to bow, because nothing in their script prepared them for this. They wrote you off as fantasy, as delusion, as harmless noise. Yet here you stand, wrapped in reality that glows brighter than their doubt ever did. And the truth crashes in like thunder. They aren't in control anymore. The stage belongs to you. The spotlight bends toward you, and their role has been reduced to spectators of your rise. That's the shock they can't mask, the undeniable awareness that the dream they mocked now owns the room, and no denial can rewrite what their eyes already confessed. They wanted a nightmare. Instead, they got proof. And proof doesn't fade. They thought dreams were fragile, temporary sparks that fade with time. But yours wasn't fragile. It was forged. Every sneer they threw at you became steel. Every laugh became a nail driven into the frame of something greater. And now that dream didn't just survive, it outlived their doubt. Look at them now, sitting in silence, trapped in the theater of your reality, forced to watch the blueprint they once mocked become a monument. They wanted you to wake up and face reality, Instead, reality woke up and bent itself to your vision. That's the humiliation they carry. They didn't just misjudge you, they misjudged the laws of possibility. Because you proved that vision, carried with persistence, doesn't fade, it multiplies until it becomes too large for the world to ignore. Their greatest punishment isn't that your dream became real, it's that they have no choice but to watch it unfold. Every detail hits them, every milestone is a reminder of their blindness. Every step forward is a jolt against their doubt. They can't look away, because ignoring you would only magnify your presence. They can't deny it, because the evidence stands in front of them, undeniable, breathing. So they sit in silence, trapped in the theater of your rise, bound by the very reality they swore could never exist. And that's the sweetest irony. You never begged them to believe. You never needed their validation. All you did was keep moving, keep building, keep holding the vision. Now their role has been reduced to that of spectators, prisoners anchored to the sight of the impossible becoming undeniable truth. Listen closely and you'll hear it. The cracking of their excuses breaking under the weight of proof. For years they hid behind reasons. It's unrealistic. It can't be done. Nobody's ever pulled it off. Those words once sounded solid, but now they crumble like brittle glass. Because every breath of your reality destroys another shield they built to protect their pride. They can't lean on logic anymore. They can't disguise their disbelief as wisdom. All they're left with is silence, forced to accept that their impossible was only code for their own limits. And nothing eats at a doubter more than watching someone else live the life they swore couldn't exist. That collapse is permanent. Their excuses crumbled the second your dream opened its eyes, and all that's left is the truth they can't swallow. You were right, and they were never enough to stop you. Feel it. The very air carries a different weight now. The same spaces where they once mocked you have turned into monuments of irony. Every corner buzzes with the story. Every wall hums with the truth. What was once dismissed as fantasy now stands as reality. They can't laugh here anymore. The air itself won't let them. Their jokes dissolve before reaching their lips. Their bravado evaporates before it takes shape, because the atmosphere remembers, and it bends to the proof you created. That's what shakes them most. Not just that you built the dream, but that the dream changed the environment itself. The energy obeys you now. Their world rearranged itself around your vision, and they are left stranded in a silence that reminds them of their failure every second. The atmosphere is no longer neutral. It belongs to you. Look around the room. Their expressions tell the whole story. Some stare in awe. Some look away in shame. Others wear masks that crack the moment your eyes meet theirs. But every face, no matter how hard it tries, carries the same confession, disbelief turned into submission. They once rolled those same eyes at your vision, shrugged off your words, dismissed your persistence. Now those eyes can't hold steady because they've seen what persistence becomes when it refuses to fade. Their faces are mirrors reflecting regret, each one betraying the truth they'd rather bury. That the dream they mocked now owns the stage, and they are powerless in its presence. You don't need to speak. Their faces already tell the story. The silence between you is heavier than any speech, because it proves your rise has carved itself into their pride. What once lived only in your imagination now stands as the throne beneath your feet. You didn't just manifest a vision, you carved a kingdom out of disbelief. Every brick of this reality was forged from their laughter, every wall raised higher by their doubt. every foundation strengthened by the stones they threw. And now here you stand, not as a dreamer, but as ruler of the stage they swore you'd never reach. That throne stings their pride, because it reminds them that they were architects of their own humiliation. They tried to bury your vision, but instead they buried themselves under the weight of proof. Your dream became their sentence. Your reality became their crown, and now they bow without meaning to, their silence louder than applause. The throne was always waiting. You simply proved you were the only one who could sit on it. They thought they'd be the ones to laugh last, the ones telling the story of how you failed, how your vision collapsed under the weight of reality. But fate reversed the script. Instead, they've been reduced to witnesses, silent, stunned, locked to their seats while the dream they mocked unfolds in front of them. That's the cruelty of truth. It doesn't need their permission to exist. It forces itself into their eyes, makes them swallow the taste of their own disbelief. And now they can't rewrite the memory, can't soften the edges, can't pretend they were supportive. Everyone remembers what they said. Everyone remembers the way they doubted. And now, everyone can see them sit powerless in the shadow of what they tried to stop. Their defeat isn't private, it's public, and it's permanent. Because they aren't just watching your dream, they're watching the end of their pride. What unsettles them most isn't that your dream became real, it's that it feels permanent now, written into the laws of their world. At first, they told themselves it was luck, a glitch, a moment that would fade. But as the days stretched on, reality refused to retreat. Your vision didn't dissolve, it solidified. The fantasy they mocked transformed into a law they can't break. And every time they see it, they're reminded of their own blindness, their own limits, their own barriers. You broke no rules, you rewrote them. You bent the system until it bent to you. And now the dream is no longer a dream, it's a rule they live under. That's why their silence stings. It isn't just disbelief, it's submission. They're forced to obey the reality you created. Because no amount of denial can erase a law written in proof. Proof is the heaviest force, and you wielded it without lifting a hand. Words can be twisted, rumors can be denied, but proof breaks defenses without a touch. That's why their shoulders slump now, why their eyes can't rise to meet yours. The dream they mocked has transformed into undeniable evidence. And evidence has no weakness. They can't argue with it, can't laugh it away, can't bury it under noise. Every second they sit in its shadow, their pride erodes. And the cruel irony? They built this proof for you. Their mockery gave you fire, their doubt gave you direction, their laughter gave you focus. They handed you the weight that now weighs on them. That's the brilliance of it. You didn't just prove yourself right. You made their disbelief the very fuel that proved them wrong. Listen to the room now. It isn't filled with applause. It isn't roaring with noise. It's silent. Not peaceful silence, but silence soaked in shame. Every doubter feels it pressing on them, reminding them of every careless word they once threw your way. That silence exposes them more than any argument could. It forces them to sit with themselves, to face the reality that they weren't just wrong, they were blind. They stare at your reality, and every second of quiet hits deeper than 1,000 insults. Because silence is a mirror, and in it, they see their arrogance, their weakness, their failure to see what was always destined. And here's the part that marks them for good. They'll never escape that silence. Every time your name is spoken, it will pull them back to this moment, back to the night where silence was louder than every doubt combined. They'll try. Of course. They'll twist the story, claim they always knew, pretend they saw it coming. But lies don't stand long against evidence this sharp. Everyone remembers the nights they laughed, the moments they sneered, the times they called it impossible. Their words are on record, in memory, in whispers, in imprints, and no amount of revision can erase the truth that now stands in front of them. The dream they mocked is alive, undeniable, breathing proof that exposes every false claim they'll try to make. That's what hits hardest. They can't rewrite history because your reality already wrote it for them. It's engraved into the timeline, etched into their reputations, stamped into their pride. Every attempt to bend the story will only point back to the same fact that they doubted and you delivered. That truth will follow them long after the dream turned into law. Now they sit, powerless, their only role reduced to observation. They didn't want to be an audience, but destiny forced them into the seats. They didn't want to see your dream take shape, but reality pressed it against their faces. And the cruelest twist? They can't look away. Every step you take upward drags their eyes higher. Every milestone you claim weighs heavier on their pride. They are trapped in the theater of your rise, forced to applaud silently with their own shame. And that's the essence of power, when even your doubters become spectators to the story they tried to bury. They thought they could write you out of existence, but instead they became extras in the movie of your ascension. Their punishment isn't just watching, it's realizing they're characters in a legend they can never control. What once seemed harmless to them, a dream too fragile to fear, has now become the force they can't outrun. Not because it destroys them with claws or fire, but because it exposes them with truth. Every time they see your success, they are reminded of their failure to believe. Every glimpse of your reality is a mirror reflecting their own limits, their own lack of vision. That's why they squirm when your name is mentioned, why their laughter sounds forced, why their silence grows heavier. To them, your dream was supposed to vanish like smoke. Instead, it thickened into steel and wrapped itself around their pride. They don't sleep as easily now, because even in dreams they see the proof of yours. And that's their nightmare. That your vision became reality and their disbelief became limits they can't outrun. Here's what weighs on them most. They thought dreams belonged to sleep, fragile illusions that fade with daylight. But you showed them otherwise. You proved that a vision, once carried with persistence, doesn't dissolve, it hardens. And now your dream stands as law, written into reality where no hand can erase it. They look at you and realize they're living in rules they never agreed to, rules authored by the very voice they mocked. That's the burden they thought they could dismiss you, but instead they became subjects under the empire of your becoming. Every glance in your direction is an admission that your vision outlived their limits. And this law, unlike their words, is permanent. They can't debate it. They can't overturn it. They can only exist inside it, forever reminded that what they once called unreal became the reality they now kneel to. What they once labeled as fantasy now stands as the very definition of reality. And here's the sharpest truth. It's not just real, it's bigger, brighter, sharper than they ever imagined. You didn't just achieve the dream, you expanded it until it swallowed their disbelief whole. Every detail they mocked is now part of the world they're forced to live in, a reality bent to your vision. And that's the ache that never fades. The dream wasn't small, and neither was the rise. It was always this vast, this inevitable, this unstoppable. They didn't see it, because they couldn't see past their own limits. But now, your vision has become their environment. Your reality, their cage. They don't get to escape it. They don't get to deny it. They can only breathe inside the truth you created, forever defined by the law of your becoming. At first, it was only in your mind. Intangible, fragile, something they could laugh at without consequence. But now it's everywhere, woven into the air they breathe, stitched into the walls they stand against, pulsing through the silence they can't control. Your dream didn't just become real, it became atmosphere. They live inside it now, unable to separate themselves from the very reality they doubted. That's what unsettles them. No corner feels safe from your vision, no space untouched by your proof. It follows them in whispers, in glances, in the heavy pauses before your name is spoken. What was once a fantasy has grown into their weather, their climate, their storm. And storms don't ask for belief, they demand adjustment. That's the truth they face every day. Your dream is no longer a dream. It's the air they breathe, and the empire you now rule. And now the final twist unfolds. What once felt unreal is no longer questioned. It's inevitable. They thought your vision was fragile, a passing dream that would dissolve under the weight of reality. But instead, reality bent to your vision. Now every doubter sits in silence, forced to witness the impossible become law. Their reckoning is lasting. They will always remember the smirks, the laughter, the disbelief, and how quickly it all fell away, the moment your dream opened its eyes. And your reward? You no longer carry the title of dreamer. You carry the crown of creator, the one who turned thought into proof, vision into empire, silence into command. The unreal didn't just become real, it became permanent, undeniable and unshakable. And from this day forward, they will never see you the same again.